Welcome to the Freeman's Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Whitmire. Join us as we explore liberty, truth, and current events from a biblical worldview. What's up, Cam? Welcome back.
Hello.
We are here, part 2. Actually, this is part 4. This is our first part 4 series we've done on the Declaration of Independence.
People better be liking the Declaration of Independence because they're going to have
get a lot of
content to consume.
They are.
On it.
They are.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth it. It's to me, and I think honestly, not just to me, I think it is one of the most important documents as Americans that we need to be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. For sure. No, I'm excited.
Before we really get into it, I wanted to ask you, I've been meaning to ask you this.
Oh, yes.
And I've been playing with the wording.
Okay. I'm on the edge of my seat.
It's okay.
Not literally. It's pretty deep.
You're pretty
this
deep.
Chair.
What is your go-to? It's a 2-part question.
Oh, okay.
What is your go-to breakfast?
Oh, breakfast.
Yes, breakfast food. And what is your go-to Southern breakfast food?
Ooh.
And if it's the same, you're totally okay to do
as
that.
far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing but Southern breakfast food.
Okay.
So
Amen,
the
brother.
rest of it can just... Whatever they eat. Well, no.
You're a fan of waffles.
No, I'm going to say... Well, you're right. Waffles technically aren't.
Southern, they're not at all.
No, but they've been appropriated into
chicken and waffles. That's right.
Chicken and waffles. Chicken and waffles is a Southern.
It's actually
thing.
really good.
Dude,
really good.
Okay, so my go-to breakfast. I'm glad also that you interrupted me there because I was about to slander like a bunch of random places in our country. So it's probably good that you.
No, it's okay.
Anyways.
No, actually, don't do that.
Yeah. So I would say. I'll give 2 answers, and then I'll throw like a little half story in there.
Okay.
My go-to breakfast on any given day of the week is cereal. And I have like a very intimate relationship with cereal as a concept. I love cereal.
I love how you said that.
So much. Like I genuinely love
What's your
cereal.
favorite kind?
That I can't pick. It's like pick
gosh.
up my favorite child, you know? So, but it's, the joke with my father-in-law is it's Lucky Charms because
Please
like he thinks it's really funny that I'm a grown adult that still likes to eat Lucky Charms.
Do you?
I do. I freaking love Lucky Charms.
No.
Lucky Charms are awesome, dude.
Oh, dehydrated marshmallows are nasty.
No,
Keep going. It's okay. Keep going.
I'll pray for you because clearly you need it.
I think you're the one that needs prayer.
So,
Drop a comment for our listeners. Drop a comment who's right or wrong here. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
Gotta compose my thoughts. You know, it's like when the mic is on, you know what I mean? You have to have an extra filter of like what you can say versus what you can't say.
I pushed you to the limit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. No, it's just like, do we have our off-camera arguments or our on-camera arguments? There's a difference.
Just keep going.
No, but so cereal's the go-to. I'll eat cereal 3 times a day.
Okay.
If I was an unmarried man, like.
I'm so glad Mara's in your life.
Yeah, it's great. Otherwise, I'd still be a savage. So, that's answer 1. Answer 2 is chicken and waffles.
Really? That is legit, not just because I brought it up?
No, that's my general like rule is if I go to a new breakfast place, that's like seems like it would have good chicken and waffles. If it's on the menu, I will order it the first time I go there without fail.
Interesting.
It's so good, dude.
No, I'm with you. I love it.
It's so good. Because it's like the perfect marriage of 2 perfect things.
The saltiness of the fried chicken mixed with the maple syrup and the sweet softness of the waffle. It is amazing.
It's the perfect combo.
Yes.
Like, it's so good. And syrup doesn't really make fried chicken super soggy, which is like a big dub.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, you're right. It is interesting.
So I love that. Then quick story.
Okay.
Because you talked about Southern breakfast,
yeah.
right? And so there are a lot of things that constitute Southern breakfast, but one of the quintessential things that I think of when I think of Southern breakfast is grits.
Yes.
And because grits is just like, it's a
It's
Southern
how you
word.
say it.
It's how you say it.
Exactly.
Going from grits, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like super
Amen.
Southern. But the other things that I had a friend who grew up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. It's like Midwestern, the quintessential Midwestern guy that you could imagine. Great dude. But he came and visited me in South Carolina, and we went to breakfast one morning, and he literally looks at the menu and he goes, "What is a grit?"
I've had somebody from the north ask me that, like, grits, what is a grit?
What
and I'm
is
just
that?
like, no.
Yeah,
Grits.
Grits. Right.
There's many of them.
Well, and then there's two funny components to that, because he asked me that, and I was like, to be honest with you, I don't know what grits are.
Do you
at
still
the time.
not know?
They're corn. I know that now. Is that right?
There is a little hard piece inside the corn.
That's what a grit is.
And that is what a grit is.
There you go. So see, I didn't even know that. I knew that it was like, it's ground up part
when
of
they
the corn.
grind the corn, that's what survives.
What shoots out.
Yeah.
There you go. So, but that was when he asked me that. Like, I was like 19 or 20, and I was like, I have no idea what a grit is. I've just been eating them my whole life.
And they're just good.
They're good.
Yeah.
And then that was the second thing that I said. I was like, well, no matter what you want for breakfast, you're eating grits before you leave this restaurant. And so he tried them, and he was like, that's not very good. I don't like them. And I was like, go back to Wisconsin, where you came from, and eat your cheese.
Eat your cheese curds.
Eat your cheese curds, which are delicious. And fried cheese curds are good, dude.
Bro, if they're done right, I've had them where they're gross.
That's probably true.
And which you would think you can't
it's
do
hard
that
to
gross.
mess up fried
right.
cheese.
It's like, how did you do that? How did you make that bad? But I have had it.
That's fair.
So
yeah.
No, I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Story.
So for me, like, favorite breakfast is Southern breakfast.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just gonna skip that.
Mm-hmm.
And while I don't mind cereal, I usually don't eat it for breakfast. I usually eat it for like dinner. As like I'm hungry and I don't want to cook anything, so cold cereal it is.
Dang. I eat it at like 11:30 at night. When Mara's
I
asleep.
may or may not have done that last night.
When Mara's asleep, I like sneak downstairs.
I don't know. I guess I didn't eat enough for dinner last night or the night before. And I was getting ready for bed, and I was like, my stomach's empty. So I had cereal.
What kind did you have?
Honey Bunches of Oats. I really, really like that one.
Honey Bunches of Oats is so good.
Yeah.
That's one of my top 5 for sure.
Yeah.
Like, Honey Bunches of Oats is great. And like, I feel better about myself when I eat Honey Bunches of Oats, because I'm like, this is healthy, I think.
It's probably not.
No, it is. Just I'm gonna keep telling myself
you're gonna keep staying in denial. So cereal's okay, but I don't think of it like as a breakfast item. When I think of breakfast, I think of Southern breakfast. And where I'm with you on the biscuits, give you an idea of where I might be going. With the chicken and waffles, I love it. I've only ever had it homemade from scratch. The fried chicken and the waffles from scratch, homemade. So I just don't think about it when I go out somewhere. I'm sure I could get it somewhere and have it amazing.
Don't do it that well, to be fair. Like, a lot of times, like, it's like one or the other. Like, the chicken's good or the waffle's good, but they're not both good.
That's fair.
Or they put something weird on it.
When Mama makes it from scratch, it's good.
It's good.
It's good. Now that I know you like it, I need to get you some.
Please do.
You will have died and gone to heaven and resurrected again somehow.
Yes, Lord.
But my go-to is biscuits and gravy.
Yeah.
Like, I love me some biscuits and gravy, sawmill gravy with chunks of sausage in it and or bacon, but sausage specifically. And
dude, you're making me hungry.
Dude,
this is the most hungry I've been on this podcast by far.
Yeah, I'm telling you, that is my, like, I was blessed to have a great grandmother who grew up in the Depression and who just knew how to cook. And she taught my mom how to cook.
Yeah.
And my mom has kept those recipes. And sorry, you
like
threw
a
me
really
off.
Creepy noise.
I think it was the wind.
But it was like, I was like, is someone about to come murder me right now? Like, over my shoulder. So, yeah.
No. But yeah, just everything was from scratch growing up.
Oh, dude,
And
that's so good. Biscuits from
the-
scratch are so good.
Buttermilk
So
biscuits.
delicious.
The gravy was done from scratch, and this is how my mom would do it. The gravy would be made after making the sausage or cooking the sausage and the bacon. So using all that grease from the
Oh,
bacon,
you gotta slap all that grease in there.
and well, no, that was the base of it. Make the gravy in that,
Oh yeah,
and oh my gosh,
that's so good.
it is so good. And then doing
delicious.
that, using the same grease for the grits. That's how they would make the grits in the morning. I'm telling you, probably actually more healthy than you think it is, but not.
Honestly, who cares? That's what I say.
It's so good.
I'm here for a good time, not a long time. So I don't know if you guys did this, but my grandma taught me how to do the thing where you like, if you didn't have gravy, because they didn't really make my one grandmother didn't really make gravy very much, but like she would taught us the thing where she'd like make biscuits and you like take your finger and you like press like a hole into the biscuit. Have you ever heard of this?
I've heard of it.
And then
like
you
putting
take like honey,
molasses or honey
molasses or honey or jelly, and
we
like
never
pour
did
it down
that.
there. That's very good. It's not as good as smothering it in gravy.
Well, I mean,
until
I'm
it's,
sure
like,
it is.
drowning.
We just I knew how to do it. We just
Yeah.
didn't do it because
Yeah.
it was like we get the biscuits and crumble them up and then cover it in gravy.
Yeah, I just remember that distinctly. There was one day where I was like trying to like cut my biscuit and then like put honey on it and like eat it like a sandwich. And then my grandma just like took one. She's like, "Watch this," and then she's like, and she like poured some honey in there. I was like, "Magic woman," you know, like she just blew my mind.
Grandmothers are
8-year-old
awesome.
me was just like flabbergasted.
Yeah,
I was
for
like,
sure.
You can do that, you know?
That's allowed.
That's allowed. Yeah.
So
Cool.
Southern breakfast, good breakfast.
Southern breakfast is good breakfast.
That's right.
That needs to be a
And-
T-shirt.
Hey, that's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
For any of our listeners,
Uh-huh.
just going to talk to them for a second. If you have not had what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
you have to go find yourself, not just anywhere, because biscuits and gravy can be messed up. Chicken and waffles can be messed up, but you've
For sure.
got to find somewhere that does it right.
Yeah, find a grandma. Go up to old ladies if you're visiting America from abroad.
In the
Say,
South.
Are you
in the
South?
South.
In the South, are you a grandma? And if they say yes, ask them to make you some Southern breakfast. You won't be disappointed.
Usually.
Yeah. But anyways.
But talking about disappointment, there's a lot of disappointment that the colonies were having against King George.
Wow.
A lot of disappointment. You
Nice.
like what I did there?
That was like the worst segue of all time.
Oh, come on. It was creative.
But you got us there. That's
hey,
all
I
that
did get
matters.
us there.
Sometimes it's not about the journey; it's about the destination.
That's not how that goes. with
No,
things.
but it applies sometimes. You know,
In this
sometimes
situation?
it's like we got there. Yeah, in this situation, it applies.
Application check.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to read the last paragraph that we touched on last time because
Okay.
it leads into what we're going to go over
Cool.
today. And for our listeners, for those of you who haven't gotten a chance to hear part 1, 2, or 3, we invite you to go look at those. Part 3 is really getting into the beginnings of the Declaration. So we're picking up where we left off there. But part 1 and 2 is where we did a lot of that just historical background, what led to this.
Cool.
So reading this, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. And again, as we get into these acts of tyranny, keep in mind the Declaratory Act. That is what they said was that Parliament had the power to bind the colonies in all cases whatsoever. So unlimited power is what they gave themselves.
Yeah.
And here are
So
some
that's
of the
where
things.
we're beginning today.
Right.
And so like what are we exactly? We're continuing the deep dive sort of line by line analysis of the Declaration.
Right. And I think we're going to leave out a couple of the points, the list of grievances, because that's what this part is called.
Okay.
well, I think a couple of them we're not gonna touch on, but we're gonna touch on a bunch of a good number of them that I think are some of the just key ones.
Okay. Some of them are highly specific to what's specifically happening.
Yes, they are.
It's like he did this literal thing, and so it's
Right.
like that's more of like you can go read that for like the historical understanding of what's going on.
Exactly. So it says here, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid word. And facts is capitalized because they're like, this is fact. We're not just making these things up. And again, not to harp on past episodes, but episode 1 and 2 really deals with the facts. Like these things were actually happening. So you want to read the first 3 here for us?
Sure. I will do that. So he, meaning King George, the king, has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. You want me to read them, all 3 of them?
Yeah, if you would.
And then we'll go over it. Okay. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislators. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power.
So a couple of these just real quick. The first one that that you just touched on, dissolve the representative houses repeatedly. He did that in Boston. He did that in New York. I think he threatened, if not, I think he did do it in Virginia through his governors. So these things did happen.
Yeah, because I was trying to go back to the intolerable acts in episode 1 and 2. I think it was in episode 2 we talked about that.
Yeah,
which I don't remember if they repealed the intolerable acts or not.
They repealed some of them.
Some of them,
if I'm not mistaken.
Some of them included things like disbanding the colonists' right to like trial by jury of their peers.
Okay, so and then I'm trying to remember.
The other one was like something about assembly too, right? They weren't allowed to assemble in a public fashion
without permission from the general who is now the governor.
Okay, so that's kind of what they're alluding to. This representative houses. It's like you've taken away our public recourse,
right?
For
and I want to make a correction. I don't think those are actually war repealed because I think we ended up at war and declaring independence before those ever got repealed.
Okay. Yeah, so, I couldn't remember the timeline. It's like, well, those some of the ones where they're not.
Yeah, they
Either
were.
way, they're touching on this idea that this has been a reoccurring thing that has happened.
This is, a year to 2 years after some of those things had taken place, and they're saying this has repeatedly happened, and it has. Right.
Cool.
So, the next part, he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. So
like locust.
Yeah, tax
that's
collectors.
That's being put there.
Hey, that's good. That actually is. That is. But yeah, tax collectors, the customs and duty officers. That some of those unlawful acts from Parliament were taxing people to pay these new officers to tax people and to make their life miserable.
Yep.
And so saying, like he's created these new offices without our consent for us. Like, again, 2 things so far without consent.
And it's usually just like a bad sign as like a general historical rule when like the way these things typically work, right, is that there's always like, say, colonial representatives, right, or like people that live in the colonies. What usually happens is if they're there for a long time, which they usually are, they build like a pretty decent standing relationship with the people that are there. Right. Like there's this understanding of like they know the people know them. It's usually a bad sign when all of a sudden all these new government officials start showing up. That's just never a good sign when all of a sudden there's just hundreds and thousands more people just running around with like clipboards is how I imagine these people like, writing things down like, no. Like,
exactly. Really, I love that British accent you just threw in there.
That wasn't British. What? No.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Ronald Reagan said the scariest words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Yep. It's a great quote.
And that's a good tie-in for us today. Like this again, this is something we've said over and over again about the Declaration of Independence: is that it's it should be used as a standard to see how well or how unwell our government is meeting this standard. And here you are, think about the administrative state, swarms of new government officers all the time. Anytime any one of these agencies has been created or gets expanded, because that happens all the time, swarms of new officers, swarms of new regulations and issues that people have no idea how to handle. And they can get in massive trouble. So we're not that unlike the same situation. Just something to keep in mind, guys.
Okay, so the third part here.
Yeah, so he has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. That was the Quartering Act, which got repealed and then got put back in place, where the people had to provide shelter and food for them. And again, this is something we talked about during the Boston Massacre in a former episode. A lot of the English soldiers, and I couldn't tell you the percentage, but these weren't always the best people. These were sometimes criminals that instead of going to jail, which was a death sentence, or being any other kind of punishment for crimes, you get conscripted into the army. And so having that kind of person in your house, that is a dangerous situation.
Yeah. Well, and then it's, they're discussing just this idea of like, him attempting to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. And so, anytime you have that sort of military force there, that's in direct opposition to the just kind of normal civil life. They're there to oppose it, essentially. It's kind of usurping this, like the natural order of how things are supposed to be.
And that's, you see that in Boston with Thomas Gage becoming the governor and the military, the martial law getting put in place in Boston. And that's just a fundamental principle of a free society, is that the military is subordinate to the civil power, to the people. And it was getting turned on its head in Boston.
For sure.
Again, bad. The next part here, I'll read this one. He has combined, King George, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. So this is referring to Parliament. This is what we talked about a lot in episode 1 and 2, is Parliament was trying to exercise and pass laws over the colonies when they did not have jurisdiction to do that. It'd be like California trying to pass laws over us. We'd all be like, wait, what? So it's even worse than that. But so that, just keep that in mind. He combined with others. He's agreeing with Parliament to subject the colonies to a jurisdiction foreign to the Constitution, meaning the Constitution never allowed Parliament to have this jurisdiction over us, and is unacknowledged by our laws. And he gave his assent to Parliament's acts of pretended legislation. I like their use of language here, because it is pretended when you don't have the law behind you giving you the authority to exercise that kind of authority, that kind of power. It is, they use the word a lot, and you didn't use it here, but it's arbitrary. It's not based in justice. It's not based in God's law. It's not based on any other kind of law. It's just because they want to, and that's the Declaratory Act again. So some of those laws, I'll just run through these, that King George agreed with Parliament on, gave his assent to, were laws that cut off our trade with all parts of the world, which did happen, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Again, the consent part is the main issue. For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. That's what you were alluding to there in one of the intolerable acts. And there was another act, I forget what it was, but it basically, certain things that happened, they could be taken back to England to be tried in a court of admiralty instead of a regular court where you could have a jury. And then for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. That's what I was just talking to. So those are some of them. And then there are 2 more here. You want to read them?
Sure. for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. And the next one is for suspending our own legislators and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever.
Right.
That's the Declaratory Act.
Exactly.
But I find the taking away our charters, and then going back up to that other sort of like larger section we talked about, subjecting us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those points kind of allude to this idea that like it wasn't as if there was just sort of like the Americas or the 13 colonies were like this wild west of laws where they just did whatever they wanted, and then like Parliament's coming in and saying like, hey, you know, we're actually going to like establish order. Or in addition to that, it wasn't that, and it also wasn't the fact that the legal precedent was that Parliament had absolute authority up until that point. No, there actually was a legal like foundation of local governance that was in place, built upon understanding with Parliament through their charters and things like that.
Right.
That they were like, yes, we're a colony of Great Britain, but we also have our own like form of government, our own local governance that we do and run things by.
Under the king, but not under Parliament, with I think a couple minor exceptions. And so the whole thing is like, Parliament doesn't have a jurisdiction over this. We do. And so Parliament's butting in on our business, and they don't have that jurisdiction, and the king's letting them. And so, when it talks about for taking away our charters, that happened in Boston again. One of the intolerable acts changed it from its own self-governing community to one that is now controlled by the military, directly by the king, and their assembly was replaced by their elected assembly was replaced by one that was appointed, and town hall meetings couldn't happen without permission. That was a big part of it. And so, and just to give like an idea about the charters are what formed them as a colony. And in those charters, every one of them, it guaranteed the people who were going to settle there all the rights and privileges of being natural born subjects of England. So that means you get all the protections of the English Constitution, which one of those big protections was laws cannot be passed to bind you without your consent. So you can see here how how they were like, England just stepped way out of bounds.
And it's very different, like, there are other examples of like colonies in the imperial world where like the subjects are not given that same level of rights. And so it's like, that's part of like what is fundamental to understand about this situation is it's like they were seen with this idea of like mutual almost citizenship.
Yes. No, that's a good word for it.
A lot of other colonies were not provided with those same sort of like equality under the law. Right. And so that's part of what's being violated there is it's like saying that like, no, this has been the precedent for a very long time. Yeah. And you're coming in and now just saying, actually, we don't like that. So we're just going to flip that on.
So we can not treat you like British subjects, and we can pass laws without your consent. We're going to take that charter. Yeah. You can't just do that. No. You can't change the rules in the middle of the game. And so they did that. They did take away some of the charters. They abolished a lot of their most valuable laws. I'm trying to think of specifics on that off the top of my head. But there were things like in Virginia, for instance, where they kept asking for certain laws to be passed, but the governor kept refusing in the king's name. And altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, again, like in Boston, where they changed the elected assembly to an appointed one, which was completely under the control of the king. Yeah. So, and then for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate us in all cases whatsoever. Again, the Declaratory Act. Yep. So moving on.
Good deal.
You want to hit these? You want to hit these next three we have here?
Sure. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. Not, it's not like that's a weighty accusation or anything.
Yeah,
now
right.
I can't talk like you, Joel. No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks.
Sorry.
It's fair.
You always point out how you can't talk.
Yeah,
I just can't talk, and I don't try to draw attention to it. That's usually what I do. So
it's also fair.
we're doing it today, though. Okay. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries. Is that supposed to say to complete the works of death? Okay, got just a little typo.
Old language. No, it's not a typo.
Oh, that's how they spelled it.
That's how they spelt it.
Complete.
Yep.
The works of death, desolation, and tyranny. Well, sorry. Word doesn't know that, apparently, because it's saying it's a typo.
I know.
Yeah.
Restart that one.
Yeah. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy.
Perfidy.
Yep, there is no I there. Perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation.
All right,
Okay,
so
unpack that for us, Joel.
Yeah, I think the first one you read, he has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That alone, because that did happen, King George did say they're no longer under my protection, and therefore I'm now going to send troops.
Mm-hmm.
King George took away his authority over us so he could wage war.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really rebellion in that sense of the people. They were just defending themselves from a king who is now saying, nope, you're not mine. Now I'm going to come and conquer you.
Mm-hmm.
So for all that, oh no, they shouldn't have rebelled or they shouldn't have gone against the king's authority. He took away his authority, and this really did happen, right? He took them, removed them from his protection, and then sent his troops. So I think that's a huge thing to keep in mind, especially as Christians who might struggle with the idea of, oh, the Americans were wrong because they rebelled against the king. Yes, we declared independence, but this is the Declaration of Independence. This happened before that. And it was the governments here, the 13 different governments defending their people against a king who no longer acknowledged them as his and was attacking them.
Yeah, which is just really interesting, like from, again, kind of like the legality side of things, right? Whereas it's like, if you acknowledge the Americas as British subjects, right, the people who live in the colonies as British subjects, they have a legal recourse to the same protections as any other British subject. Right. So you have this kind of shift to saying, well, actually, no, you're no longer of the same, station or whatever, like in the
you're
same,
no longer a citizen.
You're no longer a citizen.
Yeah.
And thus we have the right to do as we please.
Yep.
Which is sort of, it's an interesting like strategy, because it's like, if you don't do that, then you're waging civil war against your own people. And so it's kind of it appears as like sort of this move to basically be like, well, actually, you're not really us to begin with. Yep. So we're going to go back over there and like conquer you now as a people and put you under our order, under our rule. Right. And so it's just very interesting from like a sort of like legal perspective, what hoops are trying to be jumped through to sort of make this happen from King George's perspective.
No, for real. Like, and I think that's interesting. You never hear the American War for Independence or the American Revolution. You never hear it called the Civil War. And I think that's pointed to, like you were just saying, they kind of jumped through some legal hoops to figure out a way for him to send the troops and conquer them and try to blame us.
Or to subdue them.
However they wanted to say it. But he did. He abdicated his government here, his authority here. Yeah.
And it's really fascinating too. Like, there was a line in one of the earlier paragraphs in the last part that we talked about, that where they, and I'd be curious to know this would be really fascinating to see like kind of what the like history of this progression of thought of Americans like distinguishing themselves from being British subjects.
Yeah.
But they make a point to say in one of those early paragraphs about how like, you know, these are issues with the king and with Parliament, and now we are also declaring like ourselves independent from the British people. Like they make a point to say that of like we're now like a separate people, and they say like enemies in war and friends in peace.
Yep. Right. No, right.
And so it's kind of fascinating because like this whole back and forth between like we talked about how while we declared independence, King George, you know, takes away our citizenship.
Right.
And so he creates this like, you know, gap, and then we say, okay, yep, we're declaring independence too. Like, yeah, we're two separate things. And then there's even almost this like cultural or national identity in that too, of them saying like, okay, since we're no longer British subjects, yeah, we're no longer y'all.
Yeah.
We're our own people.
Yeah.
You know, and thus America was born.
That's right.
Yeah.
America.
But
So
anyway,
yeah, just
going
moving
on.
on. Yeah. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. So yeah, there were different instances of the British Navy stopping our vessels and, you know, taking stuff, and pressing people, our American people into their ships, ravaged our coasts. They started blockading things, burn our towns, Charlestown, not Charleston, South Carolina, but Charlestown and up there in Massachusetts, which is right across the bay from Boston, was burned during the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Nice.
And destroyed the lives of our people.
Not nice.
Not nice. None of that was nice.
Yes.
But yeah, so there are instances where these things are taking place. These aren't just out of the hat. We're just going to come up with a bunch of things.
Yeah.
No, these are like things that are happening, and they're like, this is why we're declaring independence. This is that long train of usurpations that's invariably leading to absolute despotism. That they're like, okay, we said that that's what was going on, and that's why we're separating. Here's that list.
Okay.
So he, at this time, is transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries. That would be the Hessians, or Hessians, depending on how you pronounce it. German mercenaries who were sent here. And those German mercenaries were very well trained, but they were also known to be very brutal in battle. So that's kind of where some of this like intense, it sounds a little dramatic, but it's like when you look at the way they actually fought the battles, very, very brutal.
It had escalated beyond just like British regulars that were being stationed there. It was like, no, we're sending more and more of those troops,
right?
And we're like going into our, you know, pulling favors to bring in
you
special
think about it,
forces, essentially.
Some British troops, officers might have family in America, so might have qualms about having to go and do things. German mercenaries, the Hessians, would not have.
Yeah, they're getting paid.
Right. So these armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun, with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. So take that, King George.
You can tell he's patriotic.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So that's the end of the list that we're going to go over. Like I said, we left out some of them. But just that last part I just read there, if you go back and listen to episode 1 and 2 in this series on the Declaration, they did petition and they got a lot of things repealed, but they were answered with repeated injuries. What they're referring to is how they would get things repealed, but then Parliament go, oh, but here's the Declaratory Act. Oh, but here's a tax on tea. Oh, but here's the Intolerable Acts. Like it just kept getting worse. It's like, oh, we got some victory, but you keep doing bad and you keep doing worse. So A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
There you go.
Boom. Mic drop.
Except it's not over yet.
It's not.
They just keep picking the mic back up, dropping it again.
As they ought to. But yeah, at this point they transition, and I'll let you read this next part.
Okay.
We're transitioning away from that list of tyrannical acts to basically kind of what we just read in that last paragraph, but how they were trying to get the British people and the Parliament to stop doing their acts of tyranny. Sure. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll read this. This is actually the paragraph I was referencing just a second ago about the British brethren, so glad this popped back up. But so we'll get into this. So, nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislator to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies and more, in peace, friends. Yeah.
A little bit wordy, but like you kind of already explained it a minute ago, where they're not just trying to appeal to government, tried to appeal to the British people in England to tell their government, hey, stop, these are our friends. Like, what are you doing? But even that was met with just deafness is the word they use. Like it didn't avail them. It didn't help them.
Right. And it kind of like what I was trying to sort of make the point earlier is like, while you obviously can see from this that like the Americans, the colonists have already, they've already seen themselves in a different light than the British. It's like we're British subjects, but we're like kind of our own deal now. This is like this hard separation of like, we see ourselves officially, because we are declaring our independence, as a separate peoples from you.
Yes.
Altogether.
English speaking, but we're no longer British people. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is just, I mean, it's like, that's a significant point in world history.
No, absolutely.
Because this is what makes us different from this point on until, today, that we are this American experiment, that we're not still British.
Right.
It's like the saying is like, we're not still drinking tea.
Right.
Like you alluded to in the last thing, it's like, and, to their credit and to sort of the credit of this, right, I feel like you've had this like historically, it took a little while, but like for Britain to recognize us as something other than themselves. But then after a while they did. And then we've actually had a very storied, healthy relationship of kindred, mutual, symbiotic relationship between Great Britain and the United States.
I think we see each other as like cousins. Yeah. It's like, I got your back.
Yep.
And you better have my back.
Yep.
Kind of thing. Honestly, that's the way it's been since after the War of 1812, because that's technically probably when the War for Independence really ended, when the War of 1812 ended.
That's true. But that's actually what you're saying about cousin. I mean, that's what Winston Churchill called us.
I was actually about to talk about
he was half American, which is
because his mom was American, right? Yeah. So Winston Churchill, he came over and he was in Williamsburg and he was given a tour showing a lot of the different places there. And the tour guide was just talking about, and this is where we, argued for and fought for American rights. And he, with his British accent, sat there and said to the man, "Hard posh."
Yeah.
They weren't fighting for American rights. They were fighting to restore the British liberties. And I think that's a fair argument. Like, British people today, and especially like Winston Churchill and of that yolk.
That elk. It's like,
I
was going to go with it because I was like, maybe Joel knows something I don't know.
I have been thinking about elk today, just elk hunting. Sorry.
Interesting. Okay.
But of that yoke, with Winston Churchill, just that mindset of the American founders, they were trying to restore, and they were fighting for what British people have always valued. And that's the way Winston Churchill sees it.
Yeah, and it's everything that we've talked about here, right? Like the legal history of charters and all of these sorts of things, and them being British subjects, it's like he probably has a better understanding actually of interpretation of the history than that tour guide did, right?
Right.
It's like the initial intention is to uphold the, like rights afforded to them as citizens that they had.
That, again, England cut themselves off from us.
Right.
And so because these rights weren't just British rights, they were God-given rights. The governments here, the 13 governments, and then the Confederation, and then the United States, the Union, was like, okay, we're going to protect these.
Yeah.
But just to be fair, like, Winston Churchill and people after appreciate it. There were people in the British Parliament like Edmund Burke. I think William Wilberforce, when he got into it, they were more pro and favorable to the Americans. They just weren't in the majority. And that's why they said things like, this whole paragraph is like, we've tried, but it's not actually having a good and real effect.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we can go on to the next.
Yeah, this ending part here, because this is where it ends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. So I'm going to stop here for a second. This is the fourth reference to God, because you had laws of nature, nature's God.
Yeah,
all men are created in by our Creator, and now this appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. And this is a very important part, and we're going to touch on it in a minute why it's important. But just keep that in mind. The appealing to God for the rectitudes, for basically appealing to Him that our cause, our intentions are right, that they're not coming from something outside of the limits of His word, and they're not just trying to be anarchical, and they're not trying to be tyrannical in any sense of the word, or just being rebellious for rebellion's sake. So they're appealing to God that their intentions are right here.
Okay. Do you want to spend more time on this one, or you want to read the last couple and then we can kind of...
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. So at that point, I thank you for that. So reading on. And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. You go ahead and this last one.
Okay. Yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. It's just like, we are governments now.
Yeah.
And then it says, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
So
nice.
Just this concluding paragraph, because it is all one paragraph. They're talking about appealing to God, and they do it in the name and authority of the people that the people gave them. So it's, again, they're not making all those fancy arguments in the beginning of the Declaration about governments are just when they derive their powers from consent of the governed, but they're actually doing that. It's like, this is the people have spoken, and we are their representatives, and this is their choice. And to solemnly, it's a heavy thing to publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And all up into that last part Just pretty straightforward, like you said. Like we're states, we're governments, we're our own country now.
We can do these things,
right? But that last part that you read, for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I don't have all the details in front of me, but there were so many of the founding fathers, because I think it's around 200, 250 of men that you could say were founding fathers. So many of them ended up being killed, lost their families to the British, had sons killed in the war. They, I forget his name, but there's a gentleman, he basically was financing the war out of his own pocket and ended up dying in debtor's prison after the war because he couldn't pay back the debt. And so when they were saying we were pledging to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor,
they meant it.
They meant it, and they proved it. And some of them, unfortunately, did it with their lives. Yeah. But
dang,
I think my favorite part here is with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. So they're saying, by the grace of God, we're going to mutually pledge, and for their support of this declaration, we're asking the protection of divine providence, the protection of God to help us. So that's the fourth mention of God in this declaration. And keep that in mind.
Right in the last line of the declaration as well.
And as we've talked about, this is the foundation for our Constitution. People who want to say, oh, the Constitution doesn't have mentions of God. Well, there actually are a couple. And there are a couple mentions and points to actual biblical principles. Like you can see right in Scripture where they got the idea from. But this being that foundation of that, this is what breathes life to the structure of the Constitution. So just something to think about.
Well, we can just kind of get into that, I guess, if you want. It's just sort of this idea of like, what relevance does the Declaration have for us today? Or specifically, what relevance does the Declaration have insofar as it relates to the U.S. Constitution?
Yeah, so what it has for us today, and it's something we said over and over again, it is our founding document. This is the original. This is what defines us as a people. We're defined by these truths about God and the rights He's given us, and that governments are to be established and are only just when they're based on the consent of the governed. Which, as we talked about in other episodes about government and rights and liberty and all those things, those are all biblical principles. And so they're saying in this, as free and independent states, as new countries, we're relying on God. We're relying on the protection of divine providence. We're appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. All men are created equal by their creator. This is because of the laws of nature and nature's God that we are aligning ourselves with. This is the foundation. This is what makes us the American people. That we all look out for each other and each other's rights for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. This is, we are declaring like they did, and we ought to see ourselves as mutually pledged to each other with our lives, our fortune, our sacred honor, that liberty and justice can be for all because all are standing up for each other. And this document is the bedrock, the foundation. And I had a congressman, I used to help out with a class of his that he had written something like this. He'd put it like, the Bible is the cornerstone, the foundation's the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution is the structure that gets built on that.
Okay.
And I think that's a good way to approach it, and that's why it's relevant for us, because the Constitution, what does it sit on if it doesn't sit on these principles? What is it resting on? What is it built on?
Well, it's definitely, just like looking at it in like a global perspective, right? Like after, constitutionalism as a concept is something that's not exclusively American.
No, Britain had a constitution.
Right.
But
one of the things that you see being a massive issue in many of these states that have a constitution is that they don't have the same philosophical and spiritual bedrock which their constitution relies on, and
you're talking about states in America or states
I'm talking about states
in the rest of the world? Yeah, okay.
So, for example, just like from memory, you have like the Weimar Republic, which is the German government that exists in the interwar period between the First and Second War.
Yeah.
They are a constitutional democracy or republic.
Weimar Republic, yeah.
And, they have a constitution that they, are supposed to be governed by. But one of the issues that leads to the establishment of the Third Reich is that the Constitution is like this fluid document in the interwar period.
Right.
It doesn't, it has no bedrock of like something even like the Bill of Rights in our Constitution that gives it this sort of like firm, like, no, this is what it is,
right,
based on this document of like the Declaration, where it's like, these are the principles that establish this, and this cannot be changed. Like, this is like the immovable part of this.
Right.
It doesn't have that. And so it moves and it changes, and it's, you have all of this sort of like interpolitical infighting over like what, what's going to, happen. And some of it understandable because they're in such like chaos that they're just trying to like figure out what to do. But it's out of that turmoil and fluidity of the Constitution that allows this, essentially Hitler to be able to come in and consolidate, the powers of, the Chancellor and the Führer, and he gets absolute power over the government at that point. And the Constitution becomes him. He is the Constitution of Germany. And so it's like, that's just, I feel like, is something that's important to remember when looking at our Constitution. Not that this episode's about the Constitution, but it's like,
but it is in a sense.
Yeah, right.
Because our Constitution doesn't have a leg to stand on without this document. And this document doesn't have a leg to stand on without the biblical principles that are the foundation of it. And I think that's just something that we need to keep in mind as Americans today, is that our U.S. Constitution, even the state constitutions, their foundation is this document. This is that promissory note. This is the ideal. This is what we are striving towards as an American people. This is why they call it an experiment, because we have these ideals. We have these principles that, again, I would argue they're coming from the Word of God, and they, because we have that to stand on, we have a solid foundation for our Constitution. And when and this is, I would say this for us today, how we maintain and hang on to these principles of the Declaration of Independence is going to determine how well our Constitution functions. And it's going to go one way or the other based on how well we are upholding and promoting and talking about and thinking about and acting upon the principles of the Declaration of Independence. To avoid the tyranny and the absolutism, to make sure that government exists for our good, to protect our God-given rights and liberty, to acknowledge that we are created equal as mankind, all of us, regardless of ethnicity or religion or whatever it is. We're created equal in the image of God with dignity and respect, given the mandate and the blessing of dominion and liberty and these things, and we can flourish when we acknowledge these things are from God. We acknowledge God's authority, and then we can stand up for each other out of love for God and love for each other to defend one another's rights and liberty.
Yeah. Well said.
So, all that, Without the Declaration, if we neglect or worse forget these truths that have been laid out and we've been talking about for a long time now, if we neglect it or we forget it, we lose a massive pillar in the foundation of our republic. Without the Declaration, the whole structure of the Constitution falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I am concerned that because many do not know or care about the things we've been talking about today, the Constitution may be on really shaky ground.
Mm-hmm.
As we discussed in our episodes on tyranny, tyrants tend to look for this kind of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to be on the lookout. And I think that's something that our Declaration can help us do.
Mm-hmm.
It can help us define and see a bad tree in its bad fruit.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So you got any closing thoughts for us, bud?
Closing thoughts.
This is 4 episodes running.
And this is a lot, but it's awesome. I think it's kind of to what you just alluded to right there. I think one of the important things is that, you have to know what the documents say in order to fight for the principles that they seek to uphold.
Right.
There's a lot in our like modern day culture of like people having this emphasis on their voice and their voice being heard, and they're standing on their platform and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a time and place for that. But if you don't even understand the foundation, you don't literally know what is in the Declaration, literally know what's in the Constitution, then you really ought not to have very strong opinions about whether or not they're being, the ideals or laws are being actually upheld.
No, that's a fair argument.
And you also have to look at it for yourself and to know whether you even agree with what's in the Constitution. You know what I mean? It's like you should, for your own self dignity and like own conscience, should know what's in these documents, just so you can actually look at it and say like, no, I do agree with that principle. You know what I mean? So now I actually, want to stand up for that or want to stand for that.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's probably like the biggest, I think, just what I think is essential, kind of in our time. And then I would maybe say just a little bit of like, we talked about giving a grade of pass, fail, like letter grade, whatever. And, we'll not spend too much time on this, obviously, because we, want to wrap up, but like, there's a lot of things that I would say should get very, very poor grades on throughout the history of America, as it pertains to upholding the Declaration and the Constitution. But one thing that I think is, I guess, fair is, this is not saying whether, regardless of how you feel about, say, the outcome of like the last election, one thing that is encouraging is that it seems to be people were able to actually like have a voice in altering the trajectory of their government.
Right.
Regardless of how you feel about it or what, not endorsing whether it was a good thing or bad thing. It's like, it was a very clear like shift from past results and like past ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And so on that way, you can at least be like, okay, no, there is still something here of like, we have the ability to continue in this path of government by the consent of the people.
Right.
This is what the type of government we're consenting to. We can argue all day long about the content of that government and how it's actually operating.
And we should argue.
About it. I agree.
Not fight, but we should have that discussion and use the Declaration.
Yep.
That's what I tell people about any new president or government coming into power, that I'm cautiously optimistic. I want them to do well, and I'm going to pray for them to do well. We're commanded to in Scripture to pray for them. But the standard is going to be the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States.
Yep.
And if it's my state government, the state constitution.
Right.
And the Word of God.
Yep.
Those are the standards. and they're going to rise and fall, and there's going to be grace, and there's going to be times when it's like, no, you've crossed the line, and we should rightly call them out when they have crossed the line out of their jurisdiction.
Yep.
So,
and you can do that by voting.
By voting,
do that at the ballot box,
and some other methods that'll be for future,
for another
future
episode.
method
Yep.
or future episode. Other lawful methods.
Yep. Cool. So, what are your closing thoughts, Joel? Sorry, I rambled on.
No, I
a while.
appreciate that. I kind of already threw out my closing thoughts just about the importance of where we are today and needing to make sure we know. And I completely agree with what you were saying. If you don't know the standards, if you don't know the principles, what are you complaining about?
Yeah.
You know something's wrong, but what's wrong? Like, you need to be able to know these things, and then you'll have a leg to stand on.
Yep.
You'll have a foundation to stand on and actually make a proclamation of why government's out of line or why they're doing something good.
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to close this whole series, this long series on the Declaration of Independence. Oh, come on. It wasn't that bad. It's a marathon.
Yep.
I wanted to close it with the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence.
Cool.
Because it's so powerful.
Close it out, Joel.
All right. We, therefore, the representatives.
Sorry. I have to get that in there.
Gonna restart.
Yeah.
Yes, America.
America.
We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So ends the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America.
Boom. It's good stuff.
Thanks for doing this, man. I had a lot of fun with this one.
This is great.
Yeah.
I learned a ton. My American history is not great. European history is better for whatever reason. But
your understanding of it, not that it's better. Don't.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole. Anyways, thanks for having me on, Joel. And I've learned a lot. This has been a blast.
Yeah.
I hope your listeners have learned something as well, and look forward to being on again.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who's listening. God bless y'all.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Free Man's Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe for more great episodes coming your way soon. For more information and to sign up for exclusive bonus content, you can visit our website, thefreemanspodcast.com. Thanks again for listening, and God bless y'all.